Vitalik is in the Time Magazine most influential list for 2021. Look at that classic Vitalik photo. We've seen it before. We'll see it again. What a guy. Ethereum founder, written up by Reddit co-founder and investor Alexis Ohanian, being recognized for his work in getting the Ethereum network to where it is today. So that's the news. A couple other semi-crypto related inclusions in the list this year, but let's focus on Vitalik. I'm going to throw this straight to Will. Interesting to see, crypto figurehead in a fairly prominent traditional magazine ranking. What's your take on this one?
Totally. I was bummed that the article that Ohanian wrote was just so short. I mean, it wasn't very, very long at all. And I was really looking forward to him to kind of dive into it. Ohanian, of course, is like a very well spoken tech investor and then founder as well. So he has an interesting perspective. And then he's also some sort of celebrity kind of mixed in there as well. So I always like to hear his opinions on tech topics. He was recently on a podcast, I think like the Bill Simmons podcast, talking about all things technology and like his investment strategies. And he's just like a fascinating person. So I was really hoping that he'd dive more into his relationship with Vitalik. Maybe there's not much to talk about there, but I was happy that the Times decided to pick him up as the writer for this article beat. I think Vitalik deserves it. I mean, you can put all the coin nonsense aside. He has a vision for what he wants for the world, what the world to look like, and he's walked through with it. I think Vitalik has taken way too much hate over the last few years, and he deserves to get a nod for the creations that he's striving for. Even if none of this kind of pans out, even none of this works, I think you can look at him and say like he's someone who knows what he wants and goes for it. And there's not that many people out there who are like that. Zach, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, so I definitely reached out to Ohanian just to get his comments on how this all came to pass. Apparently, like this is selected by the Time editors. They reach out, and I guess this year's format, they try to get other notable people to write about the notable people being included. Ohanian told us in an email that he got an email asking if he'd like to write a piece for Time, and he said, "quote Hell yes, I do," and wrote that blurb as it appeared. So shout out to Alexis for talking candidly on how it all went down. But yeah, it is interesting. He kind of notes in the story, and he shared a little bit more detail in the correspondence about, he was involved in the ETH pre-sale. A ton of his NFT investments are all obviously based on Ethereum. Some of the other projects that he's invested on use Ethereum to power the services that they're providing to the market. So was a nice little blurb speaking to the influence that Vitalik has had on Ohanian's career itself. So it was cool to see it. I'll toss this to you, Naomi. I mean, what's your take, top line, on seeing Vitalik here among some of the world's more influential folks?
I think lists like these are so dumb. So, number one, I love Vitalik. I think he is such an amazing person in this space. He's iconic. He is a thought leader. He has just built such incredible things, and he's so influential. These lists are just so political. And a lot of the times when these awards are handed out or when these lists are created, I mean, sometimes like the cynical part of me is like, well, that discredits them if anything. The fact that Vitalik's up there against some people that I just think haven't contributed nearly as much as Vitalik has. And also, I mean, these lists aren't necessarily all positive as well. They're not just looking at people who are really good. They're looking at influential people for better or for worse. So they've got some interesting people in there. You've got I always pronounce this correctly. Xi Jinping, is that how you pronounce it? I never know how to pronounce it. You've got Bukele in there, just some interesting choices in there. But you've also got people like Musk, other builders. So I always don't pay much attention to lists like this. I think they're pretty dumb. But at the very least, it shows me that people like Vitalik are creeping into the mainstream, and that's always going to be a plus because, as I said, he has so much to contribute, and if he can influence people, awesome. I think more people could do with being influenced by people like Vitalik rather than some of the other people on this list. But Will, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I'll take a shot back at your list argument. I think that's fair in some instances. It was like the Forbes 30 under 30 has ballooned into like 5,000 people under 30 who are kind of interesting. Time magazine piece though, like I think it's pretty notable to be included in, and yes, they're not always like extremely accurate. They always get a lot of haterade for their man and woman of the year, which probably fair in some instances. And there's probably people on this list who shouldn't be included when you're kind of stacking up the competition against each other. But I think what it does is really notable is that it brings these people into the spotlight. Vitalik wouldn't necessarily be on the mindset of like all these readers who are in the time, but that now they know who this guy is, and they're kind of introduced to this idea of decentralized organizations or decentralized currency because of that. So they do serve a purpose at some point. But I'm with you that there's a lot of stupid lists out there that just people click on it. So Zach.
I don't want to spar over lists in general, but I do want to give a little more detail on El Salvador's president being included on this list. El Salvador. So while the Vitalik blurb was highly supportive and probably in sort of the positive side of the ledger, interestingly, the blurb about Nayib Bukele was written by a journalist that had been, sort of cracked down upon by the Bukele regime. So Bukele's involvement in this list has nothing to do with the recent Bitcoin law there, but really just is there to note sort of his authoritarian tendencies in that country, which was actually interesting to see that just scanning through for the crypto notables. In addition to Bukele, Elon Musk was on there, a repeat appearance for Elon Musk. But again, not necessarily mentioning his involvement with Bitcoin this year through Tesla or with his very Doge-friendly tweets over the course of this bull run. Naomi, I'll kick it over to you though. Curious for your thoughts, and you can definitely go back in on Will if you want.
Thanks.
We're
I
like
really
90%
appreciate that.
aligned.
We all know I love doing that. Will, just to go back to what you were saying, if they're being put on this list so that people can learn about them, then it shouldn't be called the most influential list. It should be called 100 people that we want to influence you, right? So it's like this heavily curated list that if they're trying to use this to give people exposure to these people, like otherwise these people already have exposure to them, and Time is just curating a list with people that others already know about. So it's like, that's why I'm hesitant to be all gung-ho about lists like this, because there's always such a big political agenda behind all of it. I mean, with the Bukele thing that you referenced, Zach, it's interesting because it is so disparaging of him. I wouldn't say that this is completely separate from what he's done in Bitcoin. I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of press start to clamp down on him the same way they clamp down on Bitcoin. Doesn't mean he doesn't deserve to be clamped down on. He is a dictator, and a lot of his the things he's done in the past are kind of dodgy. So I take issue with a lot of the Bitcoiners who kind of cheer him as this white knight coming to save us all. I don't think he's that at all. But I love the fact that El Salvador is getting into Bitcoin. I love that Bitcoin is becoming, normalized in other areas of the world. And so I am also a little bit wary of influential magazines starting to clamp down on him in order to put Bitcoin further in a bad light. I wouldn't be surprised if we see more and more of that. And if we have more proponents coming on board with Bitcoin, if suddenly they get smeared, or if things start to get unearthed about them, so as to try to affect the narrative of Bitcoin as well. Happened before, it's going to keep happening.